All right. It is November 23rd at 1:30. We'll call the Health and Human Services Board order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we have a good variety of people in the room as well as online. Today we have a relatively short agenda, but we'll begin with the dispensing of the minutes from the November 9th Health and Human Services meeting.
Mr. Chair, I'll move the minutes from the, what meeting was it?
9th.
11/9.
I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Burrell, second by Commissioner Hewsome. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will do a roll call vote. Commissioner Dahlheiden online?
Aye.
Commissioner Burrell?
Aye.
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 All right, and minutes are approved. Review and approval of today's agenda. Is there anything, modifications to today's agenda?
Jamie,
I just had a question. Jamie, this other stuff that we have, well, it's just consent, so, yeah. Mr. Chair, I'll move forward the agenda.
I did have just clarification on the agenda.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We don't have a director's comments, but Michelle Miller did provide a couple of slides, if you would care to hear them, as an addendum with the existing presentation. So if you just want to call it the child protection presentation, I think that's still fine.
Do that at the end.
you could just put
Yeah,
it
just
under
do it
like
at the
2,
end. It's a pretty short.
A2.
Okay.
Or we
A2.
could just keep it as number 1, just include
Some additional
Michelle's name
slides
on it, I guess.
Okay, yep.
She's piggybacking into the presentation. Okay.
All right, so, Mr. Chair, I'll move forward the agenda as well.
All right, motion by Commissioner Burrell,
I'll second it.
second by Commissioner Hewsome. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Commissioner Dahlheiden?
Aye.
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 Agenda is approved unanimously. Today's consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve today's consent agenda if no one wants to remove anything.
I will move the consent agenda.
Motion by Commissioner Hewsome,
Second.
second by Commissioner Burrell. Roll call vote.
Aye.
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 All right, consent agenda is approved unanimously. We will now move on to regular agenda items. We have the presentation on child welfare by Rhea Bornsman. Borman. I put an S in there, it's not Borman.
And did you want Rhea to come up to, I think the microphone.
It kind of
is
has to
better.
be at the microphone.
Is that okay
Yep.
to do that, Rhea?
Podium.
Okay.
And Board, I just want to, there is a presentation that was included in the packet. It's online. If you'd like a paper presentation, we could make a couple, it's 5 pages. We could certainly make some copies.
Okay.
Okay.
Would
Yeah,
anybody like a paper presentation?
you know what?
It's online, where in the agenda,
Oh, do you have copies?
Yeah, they have the old date on them, but otherwise.
it doesn't matter.
It's basically the same as you had before.
I probably have that one from before,
Every
yeah.
meeting
I-
agenda?
But I'd like to follow along with it.
yeah, I don't have it with me, so I would appreciate a copy. Yeah, thanks. It's in my office somewhere.
It's in your, I guess it's in your email.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank
It's in
you.
your email invite.
That would be great,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think I have it, right?
Yes, you just have, actually, can I borrow one of the things I left with you?
Sure.
This is, that you,
Actually, it's 3 pages. Oh, no, it's 5 pages.
That too.
oh, you did the printouts, yeah. Okay, that'll do that.
I have a
Oh, it is.
5-pager or 6-pagers or
That's okay.
7 or 8.
Okay.
I think it was modified after that. But you do have today's presentation in your email as part of the email attachment.
Yeah, I didn't print it. Because I had it in my office, but I can't.
Yeah.
Couldn't immediately locate it.
And Mr. Chair, is
Yes,
all right if I-
sorry.
I would just do a little bit of an introduction. Rhea Borman Spears is an attorney at the Spears Family Law, and she does a lot of cases with child protection. And I guess, I kind of invited her out for this because I think it's good to get a little different perspective. I mean, we hear from Human Service, we hear from the county attorney, and here's somebody on the, not necessarily the opposite side, because I think we're all on the same side in that we want what's best for the kids. So, and I think Rhea would agree. Sometimes it might not be the best thing to have somebody with a parent that's beating their kids or whatever like that. So But anyway, I think we all know though that the studies have shown that we're gonna be better off having kids with parents whenever possible, so.
Absolutely.
And I think in my communication with Rhea in the past, she said Wright County is doing a lot of things that are good, you know, compared to other counties across the state, but I think there's always room for improvement, and that's what we'd kind of like to see if she has some ideas and share them with us and go from there. So, Rhea, it's all yours.
So I think that obviously that introduction is probably better than I might have even done for myself. But one of the things you may wonder is, why am I interested in this area, or where is my passion and my background? And so that's something I'd like to add, which is that I was a child who was adopted, and so I experienced being cut off from relatives, and it's a much different situation than I was never in foster care. So it's a much different situation, but it means that I had these ideas myself about how certain things might matter to a child, you know, not seeing grandpa, not seeing cousins, aunts, things like that, but then there wasn't practices in the county that maybe followed that. And then it took time for the research now to come out too, to support those ideas that I had, that I wanted to make changes. Go ahead, you already have a question? Nice.
I just want to make sure that everyone can hear you online. I don't know if you need to put the mic up a little bit, maybe, or,
Mark, can you hear okay?
you can? Okay,
Okay,
all right.
good.
Otherwise, you can put the mic up a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
So that tells you who am I and how do I know there are improvements to be made. Mostly just because I go to different counties. And so part of the reason, obviously, that I'm here is because I really like it that Charlie has taken an interest in improving things in Wright County. I assume you guys are well aware, although I've found there are commissioners in other counties who are not aware, that since the board oversees the department that manages child protection, you do have influence and you do have a say. There are commissioners in other counties that don't know that. So I think this is a different situation here, that you all are aware of that, and that's partly why I think it was so great that Charlie was willing to let me come and talk to you all. The other thing that I would like to start off with was my introduction. It's written on the first page at the top, and I called it AKA the punchline. So why should you care? As I just mentioned, you have an impact, and so the health and well-being of the families of Wright County, obviously those are your voters and the people that you care about and that you're doing this job for. And then the health and the well-being of the children that will grow up in the community, so the future voters. And of course, everybody cares about the well-being of the kids. And then of course, there's financial reasons. And although I'm not going to try and put some number or talk about risk assessment or give you any legal advice, I know that was something talked about, we all know that there are counties and departments that have been sued or that people have attempted litigation. And so that is a motivation and a consideration to take into account, that it can cost if there is litigation based on one of these families or the children who are wronged in the system. And then, of course, we all know there's a significant cost to foster care and human services involvement. There's a lot of information out there that I don't know how much you all know about Title 4E and all of those kinds of reimbursements. But then there's also the families that some would call the working poor, or who make too much money for the county to qualify for those reimbursements. And I know that I've found out from Charlie that is something you all have discussed here before, that there are parents who are then hit with the foster care bill for their children. And there is going to be an NPR story that comes out that talks about parents in Minnesota who are hit with those foster care bills, and what kind of I don't even know the right word for that, but essentially that's a nightmare for those families.
Has that story been out yet, or it's coming?
It was delayed due to COVID.
Oh, okay. You'll have to
was,
let me know, so I'll let the board and Jamie know when it's out, so they can.
I will do that. It's being handled by not Ari Shapiro, the one everyone knows off of NPR, but Joe Shapiro, another NPR and he's doing it nationally. He's covering all states as well. So that obviously ends up becoming a burden that falls on the county if those parents aren't able to pay or cover that.
Mark, I don't think you're muted.
Somebody's not muted.
Mark, it's that phone in.
No, it's not me, it's the phone number.
Oh,
So, oh, looks like that person hung up.
Okay.
maybe just have to mute everybody.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you.
You're good.
So I do know of at least one parent, where I'm not going to name names, of course, but who owes this county thousands, more than $15,000 in foster care payments. I'm pretty confident she's never going to be able to pay that. And so that is a situation, for the county to consider. And obviously, those costs aren't incurred when the child stays with the parent. So what's interesting to consider is the fact that the parent is having, while they're going through the child protection case, to pay for the cost of keeping up the mortgage, keeping up the home that's ready, in that case, to bring 3 kids back home. And, their kids are in foster care, so the expenses are being double paid. The foster care is being paid to provide a roof over the heads of those 3 kids, and the mom is working to provide a roof over the head for those 3 kids.
And Rhea, that is something that the board, we've actually had presentations. We have a person specifically assigned for that, right? So, and looking into it, and tell me, Michelle, if I'm wrong on this, but they're looking at deals where we can make it so it is affordable. Let's just say it's even $50,000 to say, you know what, you're only making $15,000 a year, but if you pay $50 a month for the next, let's say, 3 years or whatever it is, we'll forgive the rest, as long as you can show that you can make some minimal payment. And I think, like you said, that's one thing I think we have addressed up here, and not even here, but just at the Human Services, and then
We're
you
waiving
brought it
some
to
fees
us.
that we hadn't waived prior to that, and the board approved our waiving of some fees, so.
Yeah, we've waived fees.
So hopefully, and that's what the NPR story is going to be a lot about.
The NPR story is going to be a lot about how crazy this is that we're expecting these parents to pay it back.
Okay.
Because, for example, in that situation, the kids went back to the mom, and so now she's got to continue, paying the bills and affording 3 kids, and then she's got this debt hanging over her head. And obviously, she's not somebody, when I think about making a payment, doing a payment plan, should she? Of course, that's the right thing to do. That's what we do for debt that we have. But what about when you add the added layer of the hostility or the anger towards the department? I got my kids back. They never should have been taken in the first place. I'm not paying them anything, right? There's a whole nother layer.
I would say whoever, and I say you're not saying any names, but whoever that person is, I would say to contact our county. And Jamie, who is it at the county, or Michelle?
Well, it'd be probably Michelle Raymond or one of our collection officers. They work
Okay.
with the parents to
But
determine
if they
parental
called
fees.
somebody in
Yep.
social services, they'd be able to get to them. So
Absolutely.
maybe test our system and let us
Yep,
know.
they can call me. I know who to get a hold of.
Okay.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right, well, to get back to the science, and part of what I wanted to be the meat of this presentation, one of the things that we often see in the court system is that the court system is slower to react to what science comes out saying we should be doing. Obviously, you can imagine that child welfare is something that has been studied for, I don't know, since the beginning. But more recently, a lot of different research, there's a research brief that I've cited here made by the ALEA organization, which I believe you guys are familiar with because of a presentation, but decided not to go with that agency based on costs, which is also understandable. But they have commissioned a brief, and that brief, I've included the link, and I don't know if I've handed out copies to everyone, but I do have some copies. And in that brief, they essentially talk about how our system is doing things one way, but the science says we should be doing something else. And they don't make sense. They're counterintuitive. So for example, most people are going to be shocked to learn that a child left with a maltreating parent is going to have a better outcome in life than if they're removed. And of course, there are exceptions and there are variances to that. So if the child is so maltreated that they're not getting fed and not getting appropriate shelter or things along those lines, then that matters. But a lot of studies are going into drug use, which, obviously that's going to always be a touchy topic. But there is all kinds of research to show parents are more likely to get sober when the kids are back in their care. The federal funding has changed to accommodate parents taking their children with them to treatment and putting money towards that rather than as much towards the separation. And facilities are popping up in Minnesota, but of course they're booked and there's not enough for parents to go to that treatment with their kids. They're working on keeping babies with mothers after they have them, another thing that's slow to happen. So anytime that a child is removed, this is I'm going to summarize for the Aaliyah brief. Amelia Frank Meyer is the woman who started that organization. And I'm going to quote her because it really stuck with me. But she essentially said that removing the child should be the nuclear option. So that should be the atomic bomb. That is so impactful to the child, even if it's a day, 2 days. It is so traumatic to the child to be removed that it should be the nuclear option. And the thing that's also interesting about this brief is that they have studied the long-term outcomes. So people actually have physical health problems in their latter years of life based on the trauma that happens during a separation. And there are ACEs, which is another thing that's been widely talked about and more commonly talked about. I'm guessing you guys have heard of that, where they study. So obviously separation from your parent, being pulled from your family home, that causes you to have an ACE. And so that is something that has been widely studied lately, I would say, or more recently, growing information about that. I do encourage you to download the brief and read it. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you all of the components of it, but if I were to copy and paste everything that I thought was relevant of that brief, I would end up copying and pasting the whole thing. So if you look at the end, too, of my handout here, I've included, not the very end, but the end of the portion that's my presentation. I have included an excerpt that shows their summary of findings. And they do give a disclaimer that it's difficult to measure and isolate the impact of out-of-home placement from the impact of maltreatment. They do have these preliminary conclusions that they can make. And they have figured out, that it affects the children so significantly that they were willing to make that conclusory statement and are making that push to change the way that departments approach child protection issues. Yes.
And Rhea, this was just probably 4 years ago, maybe 5, where I think everybody read about it in the paper, this child out in
Eric
western
Dean.
Minnesota. Michelle, what was the county? Was it Polk or? Anyway, there was a county out western where the baby was beaten to death and all that.
Eric Dean was the child's name.
The pendulum swings the other way.
Wasn't it?
Yep.
I know the name of the director there, I can't think of it.
The
The
child's
pendulum
name was
swings back
Eric.
this way, and now we gotta totally do everything. And we're trying to, I think as a county, probably trying to cover our tail, because if something like that happened, where we were out there and you should have taken this kid out, and now they're dead the next day, that's, so that's the other side. I mean,
Right.
that kind of.
And so one of the things that I have heard, because that obviously has come up at different legislative sessions or, talks in front of the legislature trying to get different bills and whatnot passed that I've been a part of. The issue is that we can say it's an anomaly in the section, or in the fact that we're still talking about that one child named Eric Dean 4 years later, right? There hasn't been another one of those situations, but everything swings so far to compensate for that it ends up trapping up a ton of people in the process. So for example, after that happened in 2014, the DHS department that issues bulletins, they send out, I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but they'll send out a bulletin to the different departments, and it's a policy change. It's not something that gets a lot of press. It's not something a lot of people realize that that's how they change policies. But they sent one out in 2014 that said from now on, all petitions will include rule-outs. So what that means is when somebody's called in to the Child Protection Department and made a report of a child, if the Child Protection Department takes that call and decides this doesn't meet one of our thresholds or we're going to screen it out, that's considered a screen out. Then they also have rule outs, which is different counties use different terminology. I should also say that. So they may say, oh, we're going to rule that out as either it's duplicative or we don't believe it or the circumstances don't match up. Then there's also investigations where they might send somebody out to look into it and might say, you know what, we think it's okay, we're going to close this case. So all of those end up now being included in the petitions. So when a judge sees the child protection scenario that's written out by the social worker, they have included a section that talks about the past contact with child protection. So any history of child protection contact that's aware, that's included in the petition. And that was a big move that they made to compensate for the Eric Dean scenario, right? Because those prior calls had been ruled out, screened out, etc. So that's why they have the situation, or had the situation they had, right? Where they decided not to worry about those calls. But, as you might imagine, that caused the child protection system to literally blow up. The caseloads, when you look at the metrics, 2014 to 2015, I mean, it was, I forget the statistics, but it was a humongous increase. And that's because now the judges were reading these petitions and saw, wow, these people have been involved in child protection in Hennepin County, or these people have been involved over here, or these people have had this contact. And they started to think more significantly about the case that was in front of them. And I guess I could make critiques, of that process and my own issues with it. I think it has value because obviously history has value. But I also think that conversation with the judge about that situation might mean that some of those calls or those reports were because somebody had a neighbor that was pissed off at them. Somebody had a grandma that they weren't letting see the kids because she was drunk and she got mad and said, I'm going to call child protection, make a report on you. Those get screened out too. So now those end up in the petition. But then there's a case of Eric Dean, right? Those could have helped in that scenario. Right? Hey, somebody's been calling about this kid, so somebody should really do something. So it's something that can go both ways. It seems, Derek, like you may have a question or, okay. All right.
Nope.
So that is my response to, making that concern, is that they did make a policy to remedy that, so to speak. And I think that, the numbers reflect the consequences of that and the consequences of the rush to panic about that, because again, the system became essentially overloaded, and then numbers have started to go down as far as removals since then somewhat, but we're still way up there. Minnesota at one point, I don't know if this is still up to date, but we were the 4th highest removal rate in the country. So that tells you we're removing kids. We're #1 for Native American kids, which I know is not as much of an issue in Wright County, but #1 for removal of Native American kids. And then you look at the metrics of how often or how soon after those kids go back to their families, and you can find out through that research and those metrics that oftentimes the removals were unnecessary. The other thing I would talk a lot about if I had all day would be that the kids need to go with a relative or someone where they're not going to be so disrupted. So when we talk about that being a nuclear bomb that they were just taken out of their family, if they go to grandma's for the weekend where they've been, plenty of times before, and then mom comes to counsel, mom or dad come with counsel to the EPC hearing and argue for the judge why the child should come home, then that's been a much smaller interruption for that child's life than if they're pulled from school, as sometimes happens, or pulled from their parents and put with strangers or foster care providers. One of the, it looks like I've talked mostly about what I've got on page 2 here of the agenda, but I just touched on if the department is doing everything they can to place the children with relatives, realizing that sometimes there aren't relatives, but sometimes there may be family friends. And sometimes those people, or a neighbor, someone that the statute considers those people kin, if they're close enough. And so that can be an appropriate placement that oftentimes is overlooked. Anything essentially to avoid having it be a major disruption and a stranger placement with the child would be, a fantastic change. They also have a lot of research, I don't think I actually included this, but there's a lot of research about children being harmed or abused in foster care, and they're more likely to be harmed and abused if they're placed with strangers than if they're placed with family and kin. And that research is actually common sense, I would say, because there's going to be more of a desire to protect. And then oftentimes something that we don't take into account is that the foster care homes will include other children who have likely been abused, and they may victimize the other children that are placed in care. And so again, another element you avoid if you're placing the child with family or kin. Let's see, the list that I included here, I did put an excerpt from the Aaliyah brief, but right above that, at the top here, I put, should the department require 100% sobriety when considering removal or before returning children? Obviously, I can't answer that because I'm not a decision maker here, but it is a question that I would like you all to consider. I can tell you that Hennepin County is considering changing their policies to not require 100% sobriety when considering removal or returning children. And obviously, that is the county that handles the most child protection cases in the state, so that would be a major shift. They are a leader to look to, and that is a big deal because, especially too with marijuana use becoming less and less of an issue legally or politically in a lot of scenarios, it is becoming more of an issue as far as DHS and policies for child protection agencies. There's another thing to mention that as it seems that our society becomes more lax about that topic, child protection, again, a bulletin and a policy has been that using marijuana is unacceptable, essentially, whereas society may view it as less than. So that's another issue that I do believe is leading to more removals, but I don't know anything about the metrics or the studies on that since that change. I included the financial reasons on page 3. We talked early on about the foster care costs that aren't reimbursed, the cost of services, and then I've included, there's another study that was done by Aaliyah where they studied the cost of foster care as well, and obviously the rate of return is definitely not there for that, but it is a significant cost that comes for counties. And I've included at the bottom there, or the middle bottom of this page, that parents can bring lawsuits, which of course is not a threat, it's just a reminder that what's been more successful in Minnesota is foster children bringing claims, because we do have significant information about children having been abused in the system in our state, and there was a class action. And I did include, I think on the next page, the link to the Hennepin County article that talks about them making sweeping agreements. They were not, the settlement did not include monetary exchanges or a reward or what damages or whatever you want to call it for the children that sued in that case, but instead the compensation was that they promised to make improvements. And I did include the link to click on their settlement. And I'm not going to talk that much about it, but I do think that it's something that could be helpful for future questions and conversations because it lists all kinds of things Hennepin County promised to improve and change.
Rhea, I have a question, and I was wondering if you think that it might be worthwhile is to have legislation where, let's just say Wright County here, we go out and like in good faith we think this child can't be here. Do you have a grandma, grandpa, or a brother or sister? And let's say we can't come up with anybody to help, but this child cannot be in this house right now. And it's in, and like I say, in our good faith. Now, what I guess what I'm saying is I don't want us to be liable now to get sued because we might lose that case. Let's say somebody came up with something. So our, and I'm not sure what it is, the petition or the summons that goes to the court is so inflammatory. There's nothing, exculpatory. It's all just one-sided because we have to win. If we don't win, it could cost us money. But I'm just wondering if we change the state law to where it was said, maybe lower that threshold, to take the child even, so that there wouldn't be a lawsuit, but to be more objective when it comes to the judge, and then let the judge more make a decision rather than just see all one-sided and, you know, nothing on the other side.
All right,
I
I
don't
have a
know
lot to
if I'm
say.
making sense or not.
Yes, you are. I would say that you've kind of gone down 3 different avenues, and I'm going to try and get to all 3 of them. So one of them would be that we do have statutory language that says removal is not supposed to be the first option. So there is supposed to be a conversation about a safety plan. And that's something that I have regularly complained about in court, is that you can't find any record prior to the removal of the social worker saying to the parent, hey, let's talk about a safety plan. Let's say grandma's going to come stay with you for the next few days while we figure out if you can get it together and take care of the kids. Let's say your neighbor, your aunt, somebody, or you're going to go stay at grandma's house with the kids. Some kind of steps to make sure that the kids will be safe, and that the person will be, you know, under some kind of supervision or watched. And I'm not saying that these situations would be no county involvement or that the county shouldn't be involved. It's just that removing the child from the parents should be the nuclear option, meaning that yes, maybe they need help, and maybe they need the department and eyes on them, and maybe they need somebody to look into what's going on. Maybe they don't, but for the sake of assuming, you know, that this department obviously has a reason for being here, which, you know, none of us dispute, there are going to be a lot of cases like that. And that's kind of that middle ground that I'm talking about in that, is that there are kids who shouldn't be removed. There are kids that should be removed, and their situation may be so bad that their foster care is the best place they've ever been, right? And so, and also when you talk about a lawsuit and things like that, I don't think that this is the same kind of scenario that we'd be talking about a lawsuit. And what I mean by that is that, although I can't really give you advice about that, I'll give you that disclaimer, but what's written in the petition, yes, I agree that that information should be more factual and whatnot, but that also is up to who's writing it and what kind of overview that person has, and whether there's any critique about how that petition looks. And that could be something, I know in Hennepin County, you know, I've worked on a lot of behind the scenes reform work there, and they have made different teams. And so they'll pass the information around, and they'll review, and they'll give feedback, and it sounds like maybe that's going on here.
I think we do that here too.
As well. So reviewing those petitions to see, you know, each line of that document, let's say it goes to court or trial, can you prove it? And also that's the role of the county attorney as well, right? That they're going to be looking at that petition document and saying, if I had to go to trial on this, could I prove it? But we also have the real life scenario of the fact that the courts and the judges have to make a prima facie finding at that early on hearing, and they're more likely to believe and trust the social workers and the county attorneys that they see day in and day out, and a lot less likely to believe a parent who may or may not come without representation and who may be unprepared. I don't know about this county and whether or not you serve the petitions on the day of that EPC hearing, but a lot of counties have that practice. So the parent doesn't actually see the document that has all the things that they're accused of until they're at court, and same for the defense counsel that's representing them. So they didn't have time, especially if there's a removal on a Thursday or Friday and court is scheduled Monday morning. Over the weekend, nobody's emailing out that petition saying, hey, here's what you're going to be accused of, just so you can get ready. So again, I would have to look into whether Wright County does that or not. My understanding is you also have, I see Jamie looking over, so she might know the answer to that question. But I know that you are a county that provides counsel, supposedly, at those EPC hearings. So that's also great. But again, if that counsel hasn't had an opportunity to really have an in-depth conversation with the client beforehand, there's another policy that I know is not widely used, which is that you can ask for a continuance of an EPC hearing, and you can use that hearing to say, I want a contested hearing. So the defense counsel could come in for the parents saying, I want to contest what the social worker has written in this petition, and I want to be able to put her on the stand and ask questions and ask for the evidence and the proof for that. That's not used very often. So that's something that would make it a little more fair and balanced for these parents when they're challenging this. Another thing that that hearing could be used for by the judge, if we had a judicial audience today, would be to say, okay, this kid's in foster care, well, can they go back to grandma? Can we make a safety plan for them to go with the aunt? Can we make a safety plan for them to be with the parent under these conditions? You know, those are conversations that could be had, where often what happens is they come in on a calendar, they're jammed in there, and they're rolled through, and, they make the prima facie finding, and then they've got 14 days before that admit deny. Now that we've got COVID, a lot of counties are putting together the EPC hearing and the admit deny, so they're all happening at one time. So if your counsel's not ready to make all your arguments, that's your last chance to make a motion to dismiss. Otherwise, you're going to trial, or if the department dismisses before that, or you make it admission. So things are, that's a whole nother layer, I guess I'd add, with the judicial oversight and whatnot. But the main part of my presentation was to be able to talk today about what you guys could ask as far as questions of your department about the removals and whatnot. But I do think that it does matter what ends up in those petitions, and that it would be a lot more fair, I think a lot of people would think, if the petitions only included information that especially to not necessarily hearsay, right? Because the reporters are kept anonymous, and so oftentimes there's things in the document, the petition, that they've essentially been able to roll off a list of accusations, and they're taken as true, but there may not have been time to investigate yet whether that person is making truthful allegations. But yet your children are going to remain in foster care or out of care until a trial date, unless the department decides you're fit in the meantime to send them home. So do you feel like I answered your different questions there, Charlie? Or
No, I think that it's more complicated than I thought probably even.
well, there's a lot to it, obviously, because there's the different departments and the different layers, and the judicial branch is a whole nother portion of it. I should tell you that as far as parents suing on behalf of themselves, no cases have succeeded in Minnesota with the exception of one where somebody has tried to sue a social worker. And that's because in the state of Minnesota we have, or our circuit I should say, we have a shock the conscience standard, which rather than strict scrutiny, which has been used before. There is a lawsuit currently trying to change that, but as of now, that is the standard, and I can tell you that from what I have heard from the people practicing in that area, that the one case that did shock the conscience, if you want to know about it, I'll tell you off the record, but it was pretty bad. And so everybody else who has tried to sue a social worker, even if they could prove dishonesty, even if they could prove false allegations, all of those different kinds of things, the court has not allowed them to sue the social worker. They have protected them through that immunity clause. So what does that mean for parents? Well, it essentially means you are at the whim of your social worker, and your social worker knows that they've got immunity. Now we can all assume and trust that they are going to respect that and act accordingly based on their morals and principles and whatnot. But part of the reason I think the ALEA organization is so interesting is because they have worked with the different social workers on their own second and third hand trauma. And they have found by working with them on their own trauma that's either caused by their job, what they've seen, what they've experienced in life, what's going on at home, that it reduces the rate of how many kids they remove in that department. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind, that whatever these different social workers, they're going through their own experiences that are not, it's hard, obviously, to go in homes and see the things, that you talk about, the justified removals. And they're going to experience the trauma of these kids, or knowing the kids miss their parents, or the abuse that they've heard of, especially, when there's sexual abuse and all the things that none of us want to ever hear about happening to children. These people are experiencing that through the voices of these kids and the parents and the foster parents. So something to consider. That made a big impact on me when I learned about that. The fact that helping them with their issues did reduce the removals, because it tells you that sometimes the removals maybe wouldn't have happened if somebody was looking at it from a different perspective or different eyes. And that goes back to your question too, Charlie, which is that the social workers have a significant amount of discretion. So a lot of weight, one could say, is put on their shoulders, but also they have a lot of power. So they're making these determinations, and yes, we have team approaches that may be looking at what people are doing, but there are also cultures that happen in a department where certain things are acceptable in one department that may not be acceptable in another county or another department. And so that's a big part of what I'd like to talk about too, just because I'd like to change, obviously, the culture of the different departments to have that attitude of removal is nuclear, and to have that attitude of they should still see their aunts, their grandparents, their cousins, even if they're in foster care. They should be able to keep their family connections and keep their relationships that were important to them and keep their life as close to how it had been if they hadn't been removed, because we know that that reduces the long-term consequences to them based on their traumatic experience of removal. So at the bottom of the third page of my presentation is where I'm talking about that case Stanley versus Finnegan, and that's the case that is the one that says that these cases should be handled differently than how we're handling them in our circuit. And so it's just, you know, some legal information for you all in case you're interested in looking at things further. I did say at the bottom of page 3 that there is something to consider about whether or not the department has social workers that are licensed by the Board of Social Work. So I did talk about how they've got immunity. They do answer if they're licensed to a board of social work, and that board can take complaints from parents, families, etc., and they are supposed to investigate and look into the work and the job that the social worker did. And then there can be private or public discipline behind the scenes. But not all social workers are required to be licensed to work at different departments. I do believe, if I'm accurate, that there's at least, one, so I assume there might be more, but you shouldn't assume, but I know there's at least one social worker here that may not be licensed. And so when parents make complaints about social workers that are not licensed, then DHS handles that differently. DHS can potentially remove the licensing of the department or the county as a consequence for the actions of that social worker, because there is no board of social work to punish that individual. Obviously, I think that that is probably a very extreme measure, and I'm guessing that it hasn't been done often, if ever, but that is what their policy is out there as a consequence if the workers are not licensed. I'm going to move to what I wrote on the last page of my outline that says solutions in the middle there. And I included, that friendly reminder that the board can assert its authority over the department because the board has the funding power for the department, and the board answers to the community of Wright County as elected officials. I included some suggestions, changes in favor of the science, and then to monitor the changes. Oversight groups, a big thing that matters when you talk to the families or the people who have had their children removed. They wish there was accountability. So in a scenario where a social worker got their facts wrong, whether on purpose or not, there is not accountability necessarily in every case. And so that's something that can be frustrating. And a lot of people would point out that the judges should be holding social workers accountable, that that's one of our checks and balances in the system, but it often does not work that way. And that is the mechanism of what trials should be for as well, that if you provide the evidence or don't provide the evidence, then the trial should be handled accordingly. But I will also mention that the standard for finding a child in need of protection or services and the standards for terminating, they're pretty low. And they include things like the word immaturity. So I had a case where a judge considered not returning a child because they thought the parent was being immature because she didn't want to tell the social worker where she lived. So they're very vague. You should read them if you're not familiar. They include vague terms like neglect, right? Well, again, I talked about the social worker discretion, right? What is neglect? There's Representative Rena Moran. She loves to tell the story of a family where the mom had a fan with no cover, and instead of removing the fan, the social worker removed the children. So there's just different examples of discretion and what people...
Yeah, I was neglected because there were some years on my birthday where I didn't get a birthday present.
Well, I appreciate your humor. I hope we're using different standards. So, but again, it all depends on what may be going on in the social worker's mind at the moment that she sees that. I talked about a community liaison. That's something that I know a lot of departments have tried to use, and there's also omnibus persons But they're so overbooked and so backlogged. People wait months, years to get their complaint heard, you know, and it doesn't
Leah, can you-
necessarily.
Michelle or Jamie, is that something that we have, or have we considered it?
We don't have a community liaison system.
It's maybe something you could look into and see if it might have value, because that person would know the people in your department and have maybe a little different, bring a little different perspective to it, so.
We do, I mean, we include a lot of different people during the screening process. You know, there's folks there from different areas, public health and law enforcement and social workers who are getting some of that. I am concerned about the discussion about long wait times. It adds one more dependency to an already very dependent-prone issue, because you've got the courts, you've got the county attorneys, you've got law enforcement, you've got us thrown in there. So I'd be concerned about it putting families at risk that need to wait longer to get input, so.
But I'm thinking about somebody that got into this situation and they really don't have a clue what to do. You know, and I mean, yeah, they could get an attorney, the attorney's gonna help them at court or whatever, but I'm just wondering a liaison thing like this might help them navigate through things.
Yeah, I wonder if our family group decision-making is kind of like that. I'm sure they bring in resources to the family, for the family to have the resources outside of us, so.
I was
talking about like a neutral party.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would argue for someone independent, because if you hire someone within the department, then of course, you know, especially if they have the same boss as the person
No,
they may be
I'm not talking about
challenging.
reporting to me, I'm just saying within that family group decision-making, they're pulling people, they're pulling teachers in, they're pulling in other people from the children's life that's not us, and they're incorporating them into it. So it's not the same as a community liaison, but I think you get to the point that they're not just hearing one voice, they're hearing from all these individuals that know the child.
In a way, it would be kind of like a guardian ad litem in a way, except the guardian ad litem is only, their care is the child.
Right.
Whereas this person, it would be like that kind of a thing, except maybe more the family structure.
Maybe I should give an example, because there are counties that are doing it. So what it
Okay.
would be is, let's say that you have a parent who's upset or disgruntled or says, you know, I'm being treated wrong by the social worker. This gives them a person that they can actually reach before DHS, because DHS is another place that parents can go with their complaints. But obviously, that's a much bigger organization with a lot more oversight, so it depends on when they get to you as well. But that person can then say, okay, let me take the information from you, and then let me go and talk to a Jamie or talk to a person that's in a position to say, hey, can you tell me? It's kind of like the role you played in a case where, you know, you took that information and went to investigate. Hey, can you tell me if we're handling this the best way that we could handle it? And that person can be somebody who might be able to say, okay, in this situation, this is a problem. I mean, for example, if a social worker is caught, you know, doing something they're not supposed to do, like speaking to somebody without a release and negatively about a parent, and the parent comes, you know, saying, I have this grievance, I'm trying to get housing from this person, and the social worker just told my housing person that I'm a drug addict who's a train wreck, and I never signed a release for the social worker to tell my housing person that, and now my housing person doesn't want to give me that housing, right? So there's no accountability for the social worker unless, you know, the department heads or whatnot say, hey, social worker, don't do that again. But if you were to have a community liaison, they might be able to keep track too of that kind of information and say, these are people who are causing risk for our department. These are social workers who are making choices that maybe are not supported by our mission. It's just more ways to find accountability that's more neutral. And again, it brings keeps the complaints in-house too, where people are saying, you know, oh, I can actually go to Wright County, someone in Wright County who will listen to my complaints and look into it. The omnibus person that I was talking about, that's a state person, and so as you can imagine, they're very overloaded with all the different people coming to them. There's 4, so that's not going to work. No, so just something to consider.
I think that one of the real positive things that we've got going on in Wright County is partnering with Safe Families and, Safe Families for Children, the Kids Connected or Connected Kids. And, that's starting to, get some feet here. So those certainly this is to help, help the whole family and to keep the family together and to give support to the parents or the parent, whoever it is, and so that they're not all by themselves out there and they have someone to go to. So that's gaining more and more support in the county. I think that is, maybe a little outside of this, but certainly can help prevent these situations from getting to be needing, the intervention by the county. And so I think that, if we see more.
I don't think that is outside of this. I think that's exactly
Right,
what we're hoping.
but I mean, outside of getting, the kids taken by the county is what I meant.
But the county could refer the family.
Exactly, and
that
that's why,
So we brought that program into Wright County.
we brought the program in, so, that's something, it's been a really positive thing that's happening. And our social workers, they, Jamie, Michelle, they were just, right away, were really on board with this concept, and that's been successful in other counties, so that is something that I'm real excited about personally.
And are you familiar with that organization?
I have heard of it,
But
but I don't know.
they would come in and an example like the one I got involved in, instead of, like, this place is a hellhole, there's no way you should have kids, in this environment. The social worker could call in somebody from Safe Families and they could come in and say, hey, we'll get that crib put together, we'll have the garbage hauled out, and in a half a day have the place habitable. And that doesn't mean that that person still should not be held accountable, because then they can have somebody from public health or from child protection say, look, I'm coming next week to make sure we stay on this, But that, Jamie, where are we at with that? Because that's something I'm totally in favor of.
Well,
too.
I know
think
one of our
it's getting,
communities-
as Commissioner Hewsome said, it's gaining ground. I think Annandale has got the strongest area in the county right now with a lot of support coming around in the Annandale area. We have other areas too.
Yeah, Annandale particularly is really stepped up to the plate.
I think St. Michael has a group. We have a handful of churches that are.
Yeah.
But it's a deal where a family could just say, look, if you can't get grandma or grandpa or brother or sister, they can come over here and mom can come and see them whenever she wants, so there's not a real, like a separation kind of thing. It's
Yep.
more of a,
Community.
yes,
Well,
yeah.
And we're totally behind it.
Yeah, which is
We
great.
like that too.
And
Yep.
as you started off, with my introduction, Wright County is doing positive things.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm definitely not here to say you're not.
Well, and was Wright and Sherburne got together on this position, right?
Right. It says only, I think, Anoka and Hennepin has it kind of in a couple different areas, but it's kind of starting small, but we just had a meeting with them this last week, I believe.
There's just been multiple ongoing meetings.
So our social workers are given the information about how to make those contacts and everything else.
Yep. Yeah, and it's, when you get, doesn't have to be just one family that's working with this family. It can be somebody that might be doing some food support, someone that might be giving respite care, someone that, can be, the parent might need their kids to be somewhere else because of things that are going on. So, and sometimes through no fault of their own.
And what's
But-
nice then too is that those kids can stay in their same school, they can have their, maintain their same life that they were prior to that. So that's nice when the community is doing it because then all the caregivers are right in that same area.
Yep.
Michelle, have we used the Safe Family thing other than in Annandale, or?
We have, I'm not sure, we actually just had them do a virtual presentation for our social service course in October, and talked about a family situation that may have become a child protection. I don't know that it would have been a removal necessarily, but it very well could have been a child protection case. They just through their circle of support and community support, were able to come around it all. It was really great to hear, even though I feel like it's still really new to Wright County, it's already been active. Getting car seats for families that.
We probably just need more
Yeah.
volunteers.
Well, I mean, part of it too is that COVID just threw
COVID
a
isn't
whole
helping.
wrench in the whole, everything, and everything. I mean, so when we had a tremendous amount of interest when we had the meeting with them, not this summer, but last summer. And I don't know how many church representatives we had. It was full. I mean, we must have had 50 at the 2 different meetings we had. So there's a huge interest in it, and you know, the more we can get it going, but you know, it's very difficult. Like, you know, now they have to do different trainings virtually. So
And I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but my comment to that would be that those agencies, you know, are rising up as a response to the removals and trying to combat the fact that the public doesn't always feel they can trust the social services department. And so it would be, why can't we get social services or, you know, the Department of Health at your county to be more, you know, to act more in that same capacity, right? Why can't funding be spent on helping those families with car seats and whatnot that was listed off, rather than going to a foster care provider? And if we were to treat the biological parents or the parents that we're removing the kids from the same way we treat the foster parents, I think it would be a much different system as well. We often are very accommodating to what foster parents need or may complain about or whatnot, or injuries that happen in their care. Whereas then if it happens in the care of a parent, maybe on a travel visit or things like that, the standards are not the same. And obviously the cost, they have done the studies to figure out that paying the foster parent $1,000 a month is a lot more expensive than maybe giving that parent the daycare assistance of $300 a month or something along those lines, because that obviously has been studied as well, that if we had a lot more kids in daycare, we would probably have a lot less child protection cases for the parents that, you know, can't work or have to be home with their kids instead of getting a break. There's, you know, some, I don't know that matters to you guys, but it's something to think about as well, that's just considering the cost metrics of where the money's going versus where it could go. So I really think the programs are great, and I know that there are a lot of different ones that are popping up in different areas. I actually have some former clients that have gotten together and made nonprofits and groups like that where they're responding to somebody in their community. So for example, a woman overdosed in her car, and this community organization responded to it and started using her phone to call people to get somebody there for the child rather than the child going with the police and social services. So it's, again, just this attitude and public opinion that we can't trust social services. We need to step up and we need to step in to protect our children. If we could, you know, combat that, and if this agency were seen more with the approach of the organizations you're talking about, I mean, that would be our utopia, right? Our ideal world. And so
yep.
that's what I'm,
Sure.
I guess, here to push you all to aspire to, right? So just to finish up, things that I put for solutions or potential things would be support for the human services staff. And that is along the lines of what I talked about, let's see, with the ALEA organization and how they provide that support to the social workers, and then end up seeing as a result the removal rates and the way they handle their cases improving. So, you know, talking about a therapist or someone, I do know of an agency, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Common Bonds. I know that they have a therapist that will talk to the workers and have regular check-ins, and they talk about work.
We did check into a couple of the things, and they were like super expensive, and so we couldn't seem to justify it at the board.
So,
Michelle, do we do any of this stuff now? I mean, I think we have some of the meetings, but we don't necessarily maybe have a staff therapist or.
We do hold consultations with staff twice a week. In addition, all staff have one-on-one supervisor, but we don't have specific like to reduce the secondary trauma. We've talked about it, we've wanted to do it, we don't have the funding.
Even if you were
It's
to
our
have-
fault.
Well, I mean, just think though, money going out the door to foster care providers brought back in-house again, right? And so that would be, you know, for example, some of the parents that owe that foster money that got their kids back in the end, could the children have been returned sooner? Because that's another thing our statutes
And
say.
it may not even have to be a county employee, then it could actually be a therapist that comes in once a month or, you know, whatever, just, whether it's $200 every, you know, $200 or $400 a month.
Most insurance does not cover therapy too for adults, so maybe that's a
I'm
thing
gonna
where the
let
county
Commissioner
covers.
Dahl, Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, it's either through AMC or through our insurance where we have something for our employees. And I can't remember the name of it, but Lee might be able to remind us what it is. But that's available.
Madam Chair, if I could, I believe what he's speaking about is the EAP program through Sand Creek that's provided by MCAT.
Yes, that's what it is, Sand Creek, right, yeah. I mean, that's available for all our employees.
And I'm familiar with Sand Creek too. I think they give you only though like a limited number of visits, and then you have to start paying or have a new issue come up, something along those lines.
Well, could be, but it's still better than nothing.
Yes, absolutely, but that could be something, again, a potential contract employee, like you mentioned, or something where it's just a resource where people are required, you know, as a part of their employment or their work to talk to that person and see if that could be a much, you know, more scaled down version of what Aaliyah is trying to do. It's a similar concept, but, you know, a lot less cost. And then I listed accountability because that is the part that, of course, you hear the most from the different parents and people who are a part of the system. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but there are a number of groups and agencies and organizations that have grown significantly, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 years, that are made up of parents and relatives and whatnot complaining and talking to each other and coordinating and, you know, making noise about what's going on with these different situations and experiences family members have. Accountability is something that we all talk about wanting. I know that, for example, I can tell you when there was the or the African American Family Preservation Act that was trying to get passed in our House, and the response to the portion of it that wanted to fine social workers for being caught lying was, well, then we'd never have any social workers who want to take the job if they think they could be, you know, penalized criminally or pay a fine. But, you know, I would respond to that saying, no, we would just have the people who are willing to be honest or willing to be held accountable, and it might make people double check a fact that they think is true. Maybe they'll go double check it before they put their signature on the petition and swear it's true to the court and have it relied on for months and months to come after that. I would also add that the statutes say that a child is supposed to be returned home at the soonest possible time. So that means that when these cases drag on, or maybe trial is set or scheduled, if the parent has corrected the conditions or if the home is safe, the child should go home. And there may be situations where there's something more that the social worker or the guardian want to see from the parent, but if it doesn't rise to the level that that child is not safe in that home, then that's one of the cases that, you know, we're asking to, or I'm asking to be looked at. I'm going to go back to just to say that was the other issue about this Stanley and Finnegan case, was that they say that it violates a parent's constitutional right if the removal occurs without reasonable suspicion of child abuse. So that is a standard that is much higher than what's used in our state, because reasonable suspicion of child abuse is much different from a social worker assessing a situation and deciding they think the child was neglected. That's something to consider as well, although that's, the law that we would hope we would aspire to having for our state someday that we don't currently have. But, we don't have to wait for the laws to catch up to the practices. There's no reason not to do better just because. So I hope that this was helpful information for you all. I do appreciate you taking the time and letting me come. And
No, Rita, I tell you, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I really appreciate you coming in. But Jamie or Michelle, did you want to add anything? I really respect you guys didn't interrupt at all, so but I'm sure maybe you have some things, because I think I pointed it out a couple times where I think we are doing something on that line. But is there anything else you wanted to add?
I'm just going to say a couple of things, and I think Michelle does have something to share with the board if you have 5 more minutes.
All right.
And I would say I totally agree with Ms. Borman-Spears about the nuclear option. It's absolutely the nuclear option. I would disagree in the fact that what I heard and what I believe is I believe our social workers, it's the last they want to do is remove a child. I mean, it's a nuclear option for them too. They're coming from a place where they know and they understand that the child wants to be at home and is better off at home. So I think it's, and Michelle can show you some stats that show you how infrequently we remove children from home. And I had one more comment, which of course now I can't remember. But we are doing quite a number of things, as we mentioned at the very beginning, the fees, really, and I think we've always taken not as strong a stand as other counties. Oh, the other thing I would disagree with is, while Hennepin County beats us in volume all over the place and has, of course, the highest volume of kids in the foster care system, I wouldn't necessarily call them a leader. I feel we overperform them. We overperformed them before and we overperform them now. So I think we look to them because of the numbers and because of how much infrastructure they have around child protection. But I would certainly stand up our program against the Hennepin County program any day.
And Jamie, if I might, before Michelle goes, I think though, I don't know, like I said, in the case that I got kind of a little involved in, it just seemed like there was a power play a little bit. And I know we have our deputy sheriffs that go out and they could have somebody, F you, pig and this and that. And they're trained to just say, you know what, I'm bulletproof, just bounces off, they just kind of keep their calm demeanor and stuff. And I think that we have to do that as child protection workers as well. When somebody says, look, just get the hell out of my house, you're not doing anything here, instead of having the fight, we have to keep that professional demeanor.
I would say it happens probably daily, that social workers hear that language and it doesn't result in anything other than we'll talk again another time, So I think that's a pretty common occurrence.
And I said
I think they are like Teflon.
I think that we have to make sure, that we mentioned the accountability thing here. When that doesn't happen, and I'm not saying they need to be fired or whatever, but they said, can't do that. You got to make sure, and I don't know where that comes from, and then would the person be believed or whatever. That, it really needs somebody to investigate some of these things when somebody does bring up a case where there was.
I would hope we would always be open to looking at both sides. I know I've looked into things. We've had multiple occasions. And I think we've changed practices. I would say over the last 4 years, definitely over the last 5 to 3 years, we've made some very, very significant changes. And Michelle knows, she's nodding because she knows the conversations that we've had around some of the things that you're mentioning, Commissioner Burrell. So absolutely, I think I am accountable, so if the social workers are accountable, I'm also accountable.
I see Michelle's going to be bringing some statistics up,
It's going to be really fast.
Too. But I think the overall thing that we need to take away from this as a board and maybe as a department here is that there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we can't lose focus on.
I'll sign on the dotted line, absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
Totally agree. In fact, I took lots of notes because that's why I'm here. There's areas for improvement for sure. So I'm just going to point out a few statistics. Jamie wanted me to keep it brief. One of the things that I think we do really well and has been consistent is our relative care. So this isn't in the PowerPoint because there wasn't a pretty picture to show of it, but our relative care is almost 66% and the state threshold is 35.
And I'll have to
So-
tell you, about 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call from an elderly woman who said, I'm calling you because I don't know I got this phone call. Somebody from your office is calling me about my ex-husband's nephew's kids, like wanting, and I don't know these boys, so I understood that, and we certainly, weren't going to ring her in to be the relative caretaker, but to me, it meant that our worker was going out to the depths that they could to find a relative to take care of these kids. So she was flabbergasted that she got, and I've had a number of those calls, but she was flabbergasted that we were reaching out to her.
And I will say too, with the cases that have been in the media, they've been some really awful, terrible things. I think what the counties have tried to do, even though it seems like the policies and the law swings, is we have tried to stay moderate. And okay, when we swing too far, that doesn't work. Either way, we need to be just more moderate. So.
That, I believe when Ms. Borman-Spears was talking about that too, we're not, because we're in the trenches and we're doing that, we know that the policy, I use that example all the time, is the pendulum, and it's way over here, and we want to be here. So I think we're pretty good at figuring out how we can be more here than doing the reactive things that the legislators are doing. The legislators are legislating things that wouldn't make a ton of sense, and it's not intuitive. So I think we're pretty grounded in what we can do, but will we follow the law? Yes, we will follow the law.
So I know that I did pull up the Hennepin County, the improvements that they were making, and they sound good. Some of them we've been doing, like their multidisciplinary screening team, we've been doing for, we're not even sure how many years, but for sure more than a decade. And we've got our foster care support group, Safe Families. We've just, in the last year and a half, initiated rapid response with the goal of safety planning with families. We don't want kids to be removed either. So just some quick, and some of these stats, there we go, are things that you've seen before. They're just a little bit more updated. So to give you some perspective, so it's the far right is 2020. Just some comparisons. The blue and green are the screen out and screen in. So this is Wright County's data, compared to Minnesota, screens out 56% and screens in 44%. So we screen out, ours is the blue, the bigger percentage, the 65%. And then if you look, I just did some math, which social workers aren't always known for their math, but just some percentages on the number of cases that are screened in and then the number of kids that go into care or end up in care. In Wright County, it's about 10.5%. I did not know what it was in Minnesota, but it's about 15.5%. So, and we agree that kids do better at home. So if we can do the safety planning, I know I've talked to you about the harm reduction work that we're doing with Safe Generations. That's a 1.5-year project. It really is around how can we either keep kids at home or get them home with a safe plan of care. This is just looking regionally. So again, the screen in and screen out. Screen in is the green portion. So you can see Wright County compared to our regional partners and Minnesota. So we screen in. We're kind of in the middle of the road with our region, and we're lower than Minnesota again. I don't know if you're interested. We a lot of times don't compare ourselves to Hennepin County just because they're 10 times bigger, and typically we usually fare quite a lot better than they do. So I do have their stats if you're interested, but I'm not going to share today. So, and this is just a breakdown of the number of case management cases that we have in child welfare. So that's the very broad, could be anywhere from children's mental health, developmental disabilities, PSOP, adoption. Wright County, of our child welfare cases total, 13% are child protection. In Minnesota, 22% are child protection cases. And then Hennepin is further afield than that.
What's the average active caseload in Wright County for child protection cases?
And that was actually in the Hennepin County article, that they are with, they added many, many millions of dollars and lots of child protection staff. And we did add some during that time period. Our typical is now 10 to 12. We are a little bit higher because we are just in the process of hiring a worker, but those are ongoing caseloads. So we've been able to keep to that 10 to 12, which we feel like
And that's per
workers
worker. Are
much
you
able-
asking for the
Well,
county?
both numbers. I mean, what's our per caseload worker, and what is our average just total cases on average? You know,
So it's that 10 to 12.
yeah,
But that's,
per worker. Or unless you're saying we only have one worker on it. But I guess the question is what are we averaging over the last 3-year run? Are we averaging 60 active cases? Are we averaging 40 active cases? Like, how many active cases?
It would be more than that.
What?
It would be more than that.
I'm just pulling numbers out of my hat, you know? I'm just,
So we have how many workers that are in we have child investigations and we have child ongoing, which would be the children's assessment. Kids are at home, we're working with the families. And when you were saying the 10 to 12 per worker, was that in the child ongoing? So those are the kids that are at home that we're working with the families.
the ongoing workers would be the ongoing case management. So they're not in investigation or assessment.
Not necessarily, yeah.
Right. And the investigators and family assessment workers, their caseload is,
Fluid.
continually, so it's really hard to estimate numbers.
the question is are we attritioning out as many as we're taking in, or is it a slow build because we're taking in cases that are not being resolved? Because I mean, child protection cases are lengthy processes. I mean,
Yeah.
they can be upwards of years depending on.
We could figure that out, but I think also we've seen our costs, the days that kids are in care, drop over the last couple of years. And some of that is because of fewer kids coming out of the homes, and some of that is because fewer days spent away from parents. So I think it would be we'd have to look into, we know how many open cases we have right now. I don't think we have it on us, but you can times 11 times our 8 or 9 workers, I suppose, and that would be close.
I will say one of the things that I have found really exciting is the fact that we have Tableau now, which pulls information from SSIS and is giving us, it's not real time, it's once a month downloads of information that we're able to now like go in and see how are we doing in this specific area, and it brings us even down to worker and case level, so we can be talking to the workers about, wow, we've noticed this case has been open this long. You know, there's lots of different things that we can look at now that we didn't have with kind of the old version of SSIS, where you really had to dig for it. So I am excited, and that just
Well, and to that
monthly we
same,
can go in
and to that same point, and the conversation, maybe Michelle doesn't remember, was maybe a little while ago, but because we can go into that level, potentially, let's say we do have a worker that has a higher number of children removals from the home, then we can look into it. Is it the case? Is it a combination of what the law is looking like, or how the practitioner is working? You know, it's all kinds of things. So I think that it gives us the ability to be more targeted in how we make our improvements as we go forward.
I will say that, I mean, I think there's always room for continual improvement. And I believe that information is power. Rhea, I can't thank you enough for the information, because, I mean, these are always things that we need to be cognizant of and have the discussions to make sure that, you know, that we are checking all the boxes that we want to check. Because, I mean, a lot of this stuff is in a very gray area as to what are the rules and how do the rules apply, and to what level those rules should apply. So, I mean, there just has to have a lot of open discussion, so.
And Michelle and Jamie, I appreciate your comments too, but I hope, it's my hope that you bring that down to your supervisors, to the employees, because they need to know that this this is our expectations, this is management, this is from the top. The board has got our back on this. We need to make sure that we're professional. Even if somebody's saying, get the hell out of my house, we're gonna stay calm and cool and say, yeah, well, you know what? Why don't we come back tomorrow and hopefully things are a little better, and you know, and kind of go from there. I don't know exactly what the best thing to do. Don't get me wrong, but it's just that we need to have that. You guys are the professionals, you know, but to make sure that that is communicated down to the boots on the ground kind of.
Yep, and we do have our supervisors online today, so they were with us virtually.
Michelle, do you know how many are home, each month?
Yes.
So I guess I would think that right now, part of what I'm saying as far as accountability is, where's the translation of that information? Metrics that I keep track of to, in between, track of that, right? To say, okay, yes, I did the math, you said 66. So it'd be about 33% that are removed.
No, those would just be screened in for an investigation, and only a small subset of those would be removed.
10%.
10%.
Okay, so 10% are month would be, are these metrics for the month or the year?
The year.
Okay, so 10% removes out the year, and of course, we should also put in a disclaimer, of course, that your statistics, in case you guys noticed, the number of calls was way down. They say that because kids aren't in school, a lot of the mandated reporters are coming from kids going to school. A lot of kids are not in school. The reports and the calls are down. Child protection calls are down. So it's not that we actually have.
And that was one of the things they said, where kids are probably in more dangerous situations now without having school.
And we've brought that to the board several times since COVID started,
Yep.
about that relationship between the schools and the child protection reports.
So comparatively, we'll be down likely about 150 reports from 2019.
But I think you've done I know that every time I've asked, you guys have done, even without asking, you guys have done a very good job in giving me a sense as to what we have for out of placements at any given time. I know I could probably pick a number out of my head right now and probably be relatively close, just because you guys have given me enough snapshots in time. I might be off by a little bit now because I don't know what the COVID effect to all of this has had.
Yeah.
And where is the questioning now? Are any of these out of homes something as to the parents? Other thing that I didn't talk about that I don't know that it applies here, which is why I talked about it, but the state gives federal reimbursement. So also the state federal government prefers terminations over less permanent options like transfer. So when a case gets past that child, the child being determined in need of services, then you're in that window where it's involved with the transfer or termination. The federal government says they prefer the termination. Give a financial incentive to the county and state for option.
Have you seen that process?
Yeah, it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
So 43 million is supposed to come to Minnesota if but only if they adopt out more children than adopted out the year before. So there is this push and this financial incentive for terminations to happen, and unfortunately in our state, tax of African Americans, Native Americans have equal protections, and African American population is hit hard in our state. I noticed didn't have the metrics up there. Back to
We just shared that at the last board meeting.
so those are all things as far as reducing rates, but also that you're going against a financial incentive that dictates your practices and the way that the bulletins come out from DHS and the motivation.
Right, Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you for
And Rhea,
Betty, yeah.
you were, I don't know why anybody was afraid to have you out before. I think you did a great job.
This is there, Mark, do you have some last comments before we adjourn
Give your
here?
hand up.
Yeah, I do have. You know, our Health and Human Service people do an awesome job. You know, one of the things that they have been doing for years and years is providing an attorney at the very first time the parents are going to court. Joanna Woolman from the Mitchell Hamlin Institute for Transforming Child Protection, from my understanding, she used Wright County as one of the counties that are doing things right compared to some of the other counties. So I do have to, my hat's off to Health and Human Services where they are doing as much as they can also to try and improve outcomes.
Yep, thank you, Mark.
That is something I think the county should be proud of, because I think that makes a big difference in accountability and all of that.
Thank you.
I think it's tough for him to hear.
Oh,
Are we all set, Mark? Or just Derek, I mean?
I know when I'm at home and somebody speaks some
There's nothing else in the
out
agenda.
here, you can't hear them, so.
I heard her.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Well, that's because you have your earbuds.
Well, I thank everyone for their time today. We will hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank the board for allowing me. This was my idea, and I know there was a little bit of trepidation, whatever, but I appreciate the board letting Rhea come in.
Yep.
And I think it was a learning experience, I really do, so.
This is
It's always good to get the information, yep.
This is going to stir some good more conversations, and I think
Right.
that this shouldn't be just we hear it and it's done. I think it's just something that we have to carry forward for the next year and make sure that we're having good conversations on
Yeah.
where there may or may not be.
Just don't let up, we gotta keep improving, and if we're not improving.
Yeah, Charlie, just make sure you bring all those cookies you promised us now.
All right. Well, with that, we will adjourn at 2:57. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.